My name is Jensen. I'm a retired educator, but most importantly, I'm a proud grandmother of 4 amazing grandkids. So I am used to being videotaped in front of a classroom, but not when I'm giving a walk. So this is something new for me, and it's something new for Rob, but I think we'll be fine. As I was researching for this event, I had a goal in mind. My goal was to make it as interesting as possible and to also share a lot of the history of the island with you. It is a historical tour, so I will be focusing on historical facts. And the person I go down a lot of rabbit holes when I'm researching, and the rabbit hole I went down with this one was William Binder. I just could not get out of that rabbit hole. Every time I tried to get out, I found something new that just caught my attention. So I did focus a lot of my tour on William Binder, facts that I discovered, newspaper articles that I was able to read. So you are going to hear a lot about William Binder. He was the first homesteader on the island, at least the first documented homesteader on the island, and he arrived here in 1888, and he was from Australia. So you're going to be hearing facts about him throughout the entire tour. Let me show you a map of exactly what we are going to be doing and where we are going to be walking. So we are actually first going to be starting over at the school. Well, it's the Chapel by the Sea, but it was the Captiva school. We're going to be starting over there first and also talking about the cemetery, so we'll walk to the cemetery. When we go to the cemetery, we are going to be focusing on one area, and it's going to be William Binder and the Brainerd family. So that's the area we are going to be focusing on. And if you really enjoyed the cemetery, you're welcome to come back anytime to view it. After the tour, come back, spend time in there. That's fine as well. After we finish with the cemetery, we're going to walk back here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the library, a little bit about the Civic Association, and about the history gallery that's inside the library. So we're going to be back on this road, and we're going to walk to the end, and we're going to talk a little bit about Timmy's Nook. We can't have a tour without including Timmy's Nook. So we're going to stop there, talk about Timmy's Nook, and how many of you have actually been to Timmy's Nook? Okay. Oh man, I missed it. I didn't get to go. Then we're going to walk a little further. We're going to stop and talk about Jensen's Twin Palms. And then we're going to go down to Andy Rossi Lane. And we're going to talk about the history of Andy Rossi Lane, look at the city dock, and also some historical homes that are in Binder Lane. We're going to walk back and take a look at the island store and end our tour by Mucky Duck. If you have any questions throughout the tour, please do not hesitate to ask. How many of you have seen the Chapel by the Sea before? Okay, so a large portion of you. I do have an historical picture of when it was the Captiva school. So the land that the school is located on was donated by the first homesteader, William Binder. So what he did, he donated a plot of land to build the one-room schoolhouse. Now, on this historical tour, this is going to be the oldest historical building on the tour. This was actually built in around 1903, 1904, but they started building it in 1901 is when the actual building took place on it. And after William donated the property to the Lee County, the islanders actually started building it. So they were volunteers that built the chapel, and it was built the school. It was just a one-room schoolhouse, and so the kids from all around used it. And the peak of enrollment was in about 1916. There were 38 children that attended school here. Now, they arrived here by either boat, mule, or they walked, because if you can put yourself back in time, how different this island looked at that time. So that's how these children got to school. Well, unfortunately, the school was really only in use until about 1917, between 1917 and 1919. Because of the hurricanes, many of the farm families left the island, so there was no use for the school. So the school was really only used until that time. And then it was left unused for a period of time until about the 1920s. And then the community got together. It was Hattie Brainerd. She got together, formed an organization, and that was the first time it was actually used as a church. And it was called the Community Church. So it went from Captiva School. The second name was the Community Church. And that name only lasted a couple of years until the Methodists took over and purchased it. The Methodists had it from the early 1920s until the end of 1920s, and they named it Wayside Chapel, which is a nice name. Well, unfortunately, the building was abandoned yet again until about the 1940s, the middle 1940s. And it was a group of islanders that took control and decided, hey, we need to use this building, and turned it back into an active church. And finally, in the 50s, when it finally got the name that we all know, Chapel by the Sea. Now, another interesting fact, we are going to go into the school. It is the oldest former schoolhouse in Lee County remaining on its original site. So it is on the National Register, and it's never been moved from this location. It survived an abundance of hurricanes. So we are going to go inside. It's the original building. When the Islanders took it over in 1950s is when this little addition was put on. But come on in, we're going to go in. Does anybody have any questions? And yes, that was one of the major attractions back in that time period, was because the soil was really, really rich. So it was used for farming. And there was a key lime grove, a lime grove, coconut trees, an abundance of different vegetables. But every time a hurricane came and kind of inundated the soil, it took that farmland away. So in 1916, there was another huge hurricane that disrupted the land and made it almost impossible for the people to farm. They did stay out here until about 1920, so 1921. And then by then they had so many hurricanes and the soil was just not good for farming. Those people had to leave the island because that was their primary source of income. And Mr. Binder, he did, for my research, he did own these truck gardens. And we can talk more about that. So he did make money from that, from raising crops. But when Mr. Binder arrived here, he was the first homesteader, and he was able to homestead 169 acres. Now, typically you are only able to were only able to homestead about 160 acres. I don't know how he got the additional 9. I haven't figured that out yet, but he did get 169 acres of land. So just to give you an idea of what Mr. Binder owned, do you all know where Tween Waters is? Okay, so picture Tween Waters. That is roughly the start of William Binder's homesteading property. And now go all the way down to like the entry of South Seas, where South Sea starts, the gates start, if you're familiar with that. He owned from Tween Waters down there, both the Gulf and the bay. So he owned, this entire parcel of land. And when he needed money, he sold parcels of the land off to other people that were coming to the island. So yes, he was a farmer. He did farm. And supposedly he was on this island for about 10 years by himself. That's debatable, in my opinion, on research that I've found. And during that course, he lived off the land.
160 acres is a quarter mile square.
Oh, that's a big piece.
So it's a quarter mile each way.
Yeah.
Square. So, I mean, that's right.
Yeah. So, yeah, he was a big landowner at one time. All right, come on in. We're going to go in, and please just not interrupt. Just stop me at any time and ask questions. Come on in. And remember, this first use was a school, and then it was later turned into the church. Come on in. This picture was taken, Mary J., 1918. It was the Spanish flu. So all of these people were located right outside of this window, and the picture was taken. So we did a reenactment of this picture in 2020 during COVID. So we had a whole flock of us outside here and posed for the picture that is similar to this because it was the COVID pandemic at the time. So take a look at this picture. Come on out when you're ready, and I'll meet you out here before we go to the cemetery. I want you all have some homework right now, and I want you to be thinking about this. So I have a really important question to ask you. And I want you to be thinking about Mr. Binder, William Binder, who arrived here in 1888. He was 38 years old when he arrived here. He was known as a very intelligent person. He had a wealth of knowledge. He knew 3 languages. He could play musical instruments. He was in the Grand Opry at one time, but then he landed here. He was married at one point, had a son, and supposedly lived on this island for 10 years by himself. I found a newspaper article about William Binder, and I'm going to read part of it to you. This is from 1929, and Mr. Binder died in 1932. And the headline for the article is Sayings of a Sage. So they were referring to Mr. Binder. W.H. Binder, the sage of Captiva, a man of unusual knowledge, gained in the 4 quarters of the globe and on the 7 seas, and augmented by selective reading of the best in literature, called the press office yesterday. A visit for Mr. Binder is always a treat, for his philosophy of life is based on many years of experience and wide travel. Life is but a dream, said Mr. Binder, a small dream, and we who think soon realize how small we really are. We are here to make the world better for those who follow us. There is no religion necessary where the golden rule is used. Okay? So this is a quote from Mr. Binder. This tells you a little bit about his character. Here's his headstone, and we will be looking at this when we go into the cemetery. We'll be looking at Mr. Binder. Mr. Binder did not have any family here. He was really close with the Brainerd family, so he is buried in the plot area by the Brainerd family. Okay? So the next tombstone that we're going to be looking at is also in that same area where Mr. Brainerd is located, and this is from Anne Brainerd. So we're going to walk over by the cemetery. I'll stop again, and then we'll go in.
I just wanted to ask, it mentioned how he found Captiva.
I didn't do a whole lot of research on that. I can just tell you what I've read. And in some articles, they call it a tale. So in my opinion, a tale isn't always necessarily factual. So the articles I read is that, now remember, he was born in 1850 in Austria. Supposedly he was shipwrecked. He was shipwrecked someplace. He was coming from, he was on a German merchant ship. He was on his way to New Orleans, and there was a big storm, and he was shipwrecked in Boca Grande, in that area. From there, he was the only one that survived. He was able to float from Boca Grande to North Captiva area. And then he lived by himself in that area until he was able to make a little raft, and then he got himself back to Pine Island. And I'm not chuckling because it could very well be true. I just haven't been able to confirm that. I can confirm in his obituary it stated that he was in the Indian War with Custer. I can confirm he was. So in 1871, he was in the Indian War with Custer. It also said he was a U.S. Army in his obituary. I can confirm that as well. I found his records. He really was in the U.S. Army from 1881 to 1884. So, I don't know when he got shipwrecked. He would have had to have gotten shipwrecked before 1871, because he was busy for the next couple of years in the Indian War. He was born in 1850. Maybe back then they let them travel independently when they were teenagers. I don't know. Um, that's all I know about that. Okay, so I'm taking you back in time. Now we're back in 1895. And there was a little girl. She was 4 years old, and her name was Anne Brainerd. Along with her family, they moved from Canada to Buckhead. If you're familiar with Buckhead, it's not that far away. I can show it to you on the map if you haven't seen it before. Well, Anne and her mother would row to Captiva from Buckhead on a pretty regular basis. About 6 years later, Anne told William Binder how she thought one part of the island was the prettiest place she had ever seen. Anne was referring to a 2-acre plot of land, which is known to us as the Captiva Historic Cemetery. So this is the spot Anne was referring to. Obviously, in 1895, it looked quite different from what it looks like today. Well, Mr. Binder also owned this property, and it was 2 acres. So he sold it to Anne, and Anne was able to buy it with a gold coin that she had received from her grandparents when she was leaving Canada. But unfortunately, shortly after the transaction, Anne stepped on a rusty nail and she died. So she was buried here. So we're going to be looking at the Brainerd area. Not only is Anne in that area, her parents are in there, as well as 7 brothers and sisters. This is also on the National Register of Historical Places. And the Chapel by the Sea is taken care of by the Chapel by the Sea. They also take care of the cemetery. So we're going to walk this way over to see William Herbert, and then we're going to take a look at Anne's grave, and Anne's mother is in there and her father. So come on over this way. Okay, so here is Mr. Binder's. Here's his headstone, and it does say right on it, he's the first homesteader on Captiva, arriving in 1888. And then this is where Anne is located, and she has the cute little lamb on top of hers. And she passed away in 1901. She was about 10 years old. So you'll see around her are brothers and sisters, and you can feel free to look in here. This was Anne's father and Anne's mother. And Anne's mother got remarried. She married a man by the name of Al Gore. Oh, not Al, Alvin Gore, and he's right next door. Anne's brother is Gordon, right in that area. He was the one that got murdered on Buckhead. But we're not going to talk about Gordon right now. But if you heard about a murder on Buckhead, it was Gordon that got murdered. So if you want to come in and just take a look at these headstones, feel free.
And these, this is probably more the cemetery tour, but what we were told is these plots are 2 by 2.
I do believe that now they are 2 by 2, right, Mary Jane? Yeah. And there is, I don't know a lot of information about that. I mean, from what I learned from that, but there is a memory wall over there too, where you can also still purchase to get your name up there.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you want to take a look, and I'm just waiting to see if anybody's going to ask me this question, so I'm not going to say anything. But Anne was the first one buried here, and she was buried in 1901. That's all I'm going to say. Good discovery.
What'd she say?
What is your question, ma'am?
She was the first one buried here, but here's an infant that died 4 years before her.
Yes, and I had that exact same question. So I went to one of my favorite historians, Betty Anholt, and I said, hey, Betty, I don't really understand. I know I'm not really good at math, but I think that there's a little discrepancy here. And Betty told me that what she thought was probably correct is the infants, because remember they lived on Buckhead. She thought that perhaps they were initially buried on Buck Key, and then when Anne took over the property of the cemetery, that they were then buried here. Neither one of us can confirm that, but that is just... But I had the same question. I was like, But when you're finished looking, come on out. I'll meet you out here. Just be really careful, especially by the palms over here. For those of you who haven't been here before, this is the location of the library, and it's an excellent library. If you want to do additional research, you can do that inside the library. They have books available that are from the area, from Sanibel, specifically Captiva, and from Florida. They also have an area where they have actual, oh my glasses, actual scrapbooks that some of the earlier people that were on the island had made, and they're really interesting to look at. Also inside of the library is the history gallery, which is the Captiva Historical Group they put together this adorable, it looks like a boat, and it's filled with all kinds of information. So if you haven't had a chance to go visit the history gallery, I would highly, highly recommend that. So this is a picture of the Dickey House. This was actually one of the first documented libraries on the island, which was in 1928. So Mrs. Dickey formed a library which was inside of her home. The Dickey House was actually on Captiva Drive. Before you hit the bend where it says Jensen's, before you hit that, their place was located in that area. And then fortunately now they have this beautiful library here that you could use for additional information, as well as the history gallery. I do have a historical picture of the Civic Center. Now the Civic Center was put together in about 1936, and it still is a very lively place. Every time I come out here, there's always something going on here. So it's kind of also the hub of the community where people gather. They had yoga this morning. They have art shows. A lot of the Captiva Historical Society have their functions right here as well. Okay, so from here, we're going to take a walk on Chapin Road, and we're going to get to the intersection, talk about Timmy's Nook. And if you've noticed, some of the streets, in the names of the streets, a lot of them have been named after some of the first and early homesteaders. So we're going to walk down here. So how many of you have been to Timmy's Nook before? I know I saw some. Do you have any cute stories you want to share about Timmy's Nook? Any happy memories? Oh, your husband got thrown out of there.
Yeah.
Who threw him out?
The owners.
Well, I'm surprised they got thrown out because
I know, it would take a lot. Yeah, they were.
Oh. So for those of you that do not know, Timmy's Nook was located right down there where the green, approximately where the green flash is located. That's where Timmy's Nook used to be. I do have a historical picture of Timmy's Nook that I can let you see. Unfortunately, it's not real dark, but it was Timmy's Nook from about 1952 till about 1984. And one of the funny things about it is Timmy's wasn't really Timmy. His name was Tom. His name was Thomas. But somehow he got the nickname Timmy, and it was known as Timmy's Nook. Well, he married Beulah Brainerd. Now, Beulah Brainerd, we saw the name in the cemetery related to Anne Brainerd from that part of the. Beulah Brainerd's dad was Gordon Brainerd, the man who got murdered on Buck Key. So Beulah married Timmy, and they ran it. And also, Timmy and Beulah, their house, if you're familiar with Dave and Queenie Jensen, they lived across the street from the Green Flash. That was actually Timmy and Beulah's home. They lived there. And to this day, and I think we did hear a nice story, it is remembered as a place where the locals and the tourists could come and count on the Wiles girls to serve up a good time. It was affordable hamburgers, ice cold slices of blueberry sour cream pie. Okay, how many of you had the blueberry sour cream pie. Okay, because I had never been to Timmy's Nook, I never had the official one, but we did have a picnic here with the Captiva Historical Society not long ago, and one of the participants made a pie, and it was really, really good. So it was quite the place for the tourists. It was quite the place for the locals. It was a nice hangout, a nice fun place to be. And you can take a look behind me. That's the place we're going to be talking about. How many of you are familiar with Jensen's Twin Palm Resort and Marina? Okay, a couple of you are. Well, that is located right behind me and over in that area a little bit. So I have a historical picture of it. Prior to the hurricane, the historical picture and the present day picture looked pretty much the same. There wasn't a whole lot of changes. Unfortunately, the hurricane made those changes for us. It first appeared on the county tax roll in about 1926. So it's still, it's almost 100 years old, that area is. Beulah Brainert, who married Timmy from Timmy's Nook, she owned this parcel of land at one time. And also an Ohio truck farmer. His name was John Engel. He owned that, and he sold tomatoes on that property, and coconut palm trees grew in that area. Well, John Engel had a daughter, and her name was Pauline. How many of you are familiar with the Bailey family from Sanibel? Okay. Well, Francis Bailey, one of the Bailey boys, he married Pauline. That was his first wife, was Pauline, and her father at once upon a time owned the resort behind us. Now, Richard and Red was his nickname, and Betty purchased it in about 1976, and the family just sold it in 2020. And 6 of the original cottages, they date back to the 1930s, and the dock actually dated back to the 1950s. It is currently owned by Royal Shell. Right, Mary Jane? Royal Shell? Is that who owns it now? Okay. So if you want to take a look as we pass it, you'll see that 6 of the cottages were original to the 1930s, and the dock, I don't know how much damage they received from the hurricane, okay. So we're going to walk down, and then I'll meet you at the corner of Andy Rossi. Again, be careful on this strip of land. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Andy Rossi, and we're also going to talk a little bit about this building. Am I doing okay, Rob? Can you see me? All right. It is currently John R. Woods is the realtor office that it currently is. But the first known realtor on Sanibel and Captiva was Priscilla Murphy. How many of you have heard of Priscilla Murphy? Okay, a couple of you have. Well, I do kind of question that as well, because I'm going back to William Binder. And remember, William Binder owned 169 acres of land. He sold parcels of his land off to gain money. So, here's my question. Was Priscilla Murphy the first realtor, or was it William Binder? Was he the first realtor? Because he actually got money. He got money for it. I don't think he traded for goods. I think he actually got money. That's just a little sidekick on who really was the first realtor. But she is the first known realtor, and she started in Sanibel in the 1950s. Well, there's a connection between Priscilla and Andy Rossi, because remember, in the 1950s, there was no causeway. So it was a little bit more challenging to get out to Captiva. Well, Andy Rossi, being the fisherman and guide that he was, he would transport Priscilla Murphy's clients and Priscilla up here, and kind of was a tour guide, would show them around and say, oh, this is a nice plot of land, this is a nice house, and kind of help Priscilla with that. So that is Priscilla's connection with Andy Rossi. Now, Andy Rossi, he was originally born in England in 1903, but he left shortly thereafter and moved to Tampa. When he was 16 years old, he started working as a fishing guide, so that was his primary interest. He got married in 1924 to a woman by the name of Deza, who was a quite lively lady as well. And she was relatively young when they got married. She was between 14 and 15. But they lived happily ever after. And Andy, in the 1935, he worked for Tween Waters, but he was able to purchase the city dock, Pop Randall's, in the 1940s. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a walk. I want to get you in the middle of this road because I want you all to look at something. I have, and I'll walk this around. I have an historical picture of the city dock. Now that was the first name of the dock that was located in this area. And that was like in the early 1905, kind of around in that area. This is a picture of that. And we are actually going to walk into the middle of the road. And I want you to look down that road and you'll be looking at what you would have seen, quite a few years ago, but you would have seen this area down there. It was called the City Dock, and it was the hub of the island. During this time, that's when the river streamers came in. They're the ones that brought the residents, the visitors along, and all the supplies to the island. The mailboat came out here. They dropped off ice. They dropped off food. And this was used all the way up until the causeway came in, which was in 1963. So come on over here. We're going to take a look down and see if the view has changed. And I want you just to take a look down there. And that is what you would have been seeing back 1901-ish kind of time period. You would have seen a view like this. Now that's where the dock was located. And the dock was there for a great number of years. And it was Andy Rossi that actually changed the location of the dock. Okay, so we'll walk this way. And you can keep looking down here, because I want you to take a look at this building. I do have an historical picture of this building as well. Remember I told you that unfortunately we don't have a lot of historical homes or properties left on the island. The school was built in about 1901-ish area, so that is old, historical. This was actually built in 1905. Now this was actually located at the end of the dock, so it was in a totally different location. And starting in the mid to late 20s, a different owner took over, and that was Charles and Annie Randall. And they called them Mom and Pops, as they were called. And they operated a grocery store, a fish house, and a gas pump. So this was used for multiple things. It is now used for Captiva cruises. So if you haven't booked a cruise with Captiva Cruises, I would highly recommend it. The people are great. They're fantastic people, and the cruises are wonderful. We're going to walk a little further, kind of into McCarthy's parking lot, because I do want to show you Andy's Fishing Pier, when it was Andy's Fishing Pier. Now, he purchased it in 1940s, and the original dock was located here, but Andy moved it over here. And we're going to take a look at that.
So this Binder Drive.
Yes, good eye. We're heading down Binder.
Nice.
So when it turned into, it was Andy's Fishing Pier, but then it also got the name of Andy's Fishing Pier and Waterfront Saloon. It was the place to be on a Saturday night. Probably tough competition for Timmy's Nook. It was a great place to meet people. Andy and his wife Deza, they told these long tales, and I mean, it was just a great, great place to be. Andy and Deza actually turned that little building into their home. So that was their home. So Andy, the owner of the fishing pier, he and his wife Deza lived in there. After it was no longer Andy's Fishing Pier, Paul McCarthy purchased it in about 1986. And he owned it until he passed. He passed away in 2016. And the people that he had working for him, and they had been working for Paul for several years, two couples ended up purchasing it. And it is now called Captiva Cruises. And they're a great group of people. So like I said, if you haven't booked a cruise, I would highly recommend them. So that is the other historical piece of property, home, that we will see. And you can see, if you turn around, you can see there's a little plaque on there that says 1905. That was plaqued by the Captiva Island Historical Society. They have plaqued a couple other properties that we're going to see along the way. And they had a nice celebration in honor of preservation and in keeping that historical landmark. Now, good eye. He said, oh, I see Binder Drive. And that's where we're headed next, is to Binder Drive. So we'll take a little walk back here. Okay, so this is Binder Drive, and it was named after William Binder. He owned this parcel of land. So from where we are standing to about the corner of Old Lodge Lane, he ended up selling this large parcel of land in 1909. He needed some money, so he sold it. And the man's name was called Mr. Muncie. He is the first person that purchased it. Mr. Muncie didn't last long. I think either he sold it or he died. I can't remember. But anyways, he didn't own it for very long. And this other guy bought it by the name of F.A. Miles. No, I'm sorry, F.A. Lane. He purchased it. And they called this area the F.A. Lane subdivision. So these homes, the two that we are going to look at, the subdivision was developed between 1912 and 1920-ish, kind of in that time period. And again, they would have owned the land from the Bayside all the way down to the Gulf by Mucky Duck is. That's the parcel of property that F.A. Lane purchased. And the house that we are going to look at is coming up, and that is, this is an historical picture of it. I'll show you this picture when we get in front of the house, because there's not much difference, luckily. The people that currently own it are the Terrells. It's been in their family for several years. They are true people that value preservation. So they take really good care of the home. It looks adorable. They take a lot of pride in ownership of it. It does have an historical plaque on it.
Do you
So
have any idea what lots sold for back in the early 1900s?
I don't have it in my notes. So I could make something up, but I'm not. I don't know.
We wouldn't know.
That is a good question, though. I don't know, because you figure Mr. Binder got 169 acres for relatively nothing. But I mean, he had to make money too. So I don't know. I really don't know how much it sold for. Fortunately, they had some damage, so they're getting some work done. But it's the Terrell family that owns it. And this is what the historical picture of the house looks like. So there aren't really too many changes. And there is a plaque on the house from the Captiva Historical Society, so it will be preserved. And also, don't turn yet. I'm going to show you. The other historical home that is on Binder Drive is right behind you, right over there. Here is an historical picture of that. And just remember, the time frame for this subdivision was like 1912, 1920-ish time. So that's the time period for these homes. And at the end of Old Lodge Lane, there used to be a big resort there, a big hotel. It went through a couple of different names. It was like Bayview Inn, Fisherman's Lodge, Captiva Hotel. It was a couple of things. It burnt down in 1948. But again, at one time, Mr. Binder owned that piece of property as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to walk back, get onto Andy Rossi Lane, and then we're going to talk about the Island Store, if you're familiar with the Island Store. But before we cross the street over to the Island Store and talk about that, I just, again, want to create a picture in your mind as to what those buildings used to look like. So when we first crossed the street, other than Royal Shell on the left-hand side of the street, the initial buildings on each side were pretty much how the cottages looked a long time ago. And after those, in my opinion, adorable cottages, you'll see these much larger homes. If you all could do me a huge favor, I would definitely appreciate it. I have been looking and looking and looking for a picture of William Herbert Binder. Cannot find a single picture of him. I forgot to tell you one thing. It would be easy to tell if it's William Herbert Binder because he's missing an eye. He only has one eye. He injured himself cleaning a gun, either when he was on the island or right before he got to that. So he either has a patch or it's all sewed up. I don't know, because I can't locate a picture of him. So he hung out with people that had their pictures taken. He just wasn't included. Maybe by his choice. But these are the type of homes, and I know it's really small, but the type of home that William Binder lived in people of that time, were those palm frond homes. So it looked like this. It was just made of leaves. So this was the type of home that William Binder would have lived in 1888. It looks similar to that. All right, let's walk on over to the Island store. And again, we'll try to get in the shade. And what we're going to be looking at is the Island store, which is also plaqued by the Captiva Historical Society, also has a plaque on it. Now, the earliest records that this building dates back to is about the 1915s, is how far back this goes. And this initially was Mrs. Miller's two-story boarding house. So it was a boarding house, and it had a second floor on it. Ding Darling owned it at one time, and when he owned it, he kind of remodeled it and also took away the second floor. But in 1970, or was going to take away the second floor. In 1976, this other person by the name of Irving Parker Mills owned it, and that's when the floor was still there. The second floor was still there. Ding Darling didn't eliminate the second floor at that point. He just remodeled some of it, the lower level of it. Now, this building has been used for a multitude of things. It was used for the boarding house, Mrs. Miller's boarding house. It was a beauty parlor. The Snyder School, if you've heard of the Snyder's Boys School that used to be located here, they used that as extra dormitory space. It was a general store, a restaurant, used as the hurricane shelter, and people would actually go there to vote. Now, when Irving Parker Mills owned it, he did some heavy intensive remodeling and did eliminate the second floor. And it was at that point, when he was eliminating the second floor, that what he discovered supported the idea that there is a strong possibility that it was used as ladies of the night at one time. And that would have been the captains and the sailors that were over at Fisherman's Lodge. They would kind of come over here and visit. So that was discovered during Irving Parker Mills when he purchased it in 1976. It is on the Lake County Historical Preservation marked as well. In 1992 it was marked. It's now part of RLR Investments, which also owns Royal Shell. The Bailey store, they lease it. They started leasing it in 2018. So if you have a chance, take a look in the store. The Baileys did a great job with their renovations. They stayed true to the character of the building and tried to get as much historical material as they could, or at least material that looked like it was historical. Okay, so we are going to take a walk down here. We're going to end up at Gulfview Inn, or the Mucky Duck. And just remember, as we're walking, take a look at the little cottages on both sides. Now, that's what this entire street looked like once upon a time. Okay, and then you'll see the drastic change when the cottages are no longer visible. You will notice on your right there is another example of a cute little cottage that did survive. And that is relatively old too. I want to say that was probably built in the 1930s. But that's awfully cute from the outside. It's used as a real estate office. Okay, we are going to stop right here so you can take a look at the Mucky Duck. And we're out of everybody's way. As you can see, it's a really popular spot. Now, back when we were on Binder Drive, we talked briefly about the Fisherman's Lodge, one of the hotels that was near Binder's property. Well, this was originally built as a Gulfside dressing room for the Fisherman's Lodge. So the people staying at Fisherman's Lodge, they'd come over here, change into their bathing suits, and go into the Gulf. So this was built in 1924. In 1927, James and Signe Whiteman, they purchased it and turned it into a dining room, and it was they called it the Gulf View Inn, and this is a historical picture of that. So really not too many changes. It is now the Mucky Duck. They took it over in the 1970s. In 1993, the building was recognized by the Lee County Historical Preservation Board. And we talked about the Bailey brothers, Francis Bailey, John Bailey. Um, Francis had a brother, John. And John's brother ended up marrying the owner of Gulfview Inn. So one of the brothers married a daughter that owned the current day Jensens. Another brother ended up marrying the current day Mucky Duck. So it's just kind of funny because they're, think about it, they were all the way from Sanibel, which was far back then, and then to come up here. So this building has withstood many, many hurricanes, and it's still standing. And it was one of the first ones to open after the last hurricane, which is amazing since it's so close to the water. But you notice that the vegetation is all gone that used to be here. So this is the last stop on the tour, and what we're going to do is we're going to walk back there, and we're going to get back to the chapel by the sea. But before we do that, I wanted to show you some historical pictures of the erosion and how big Captiva used to be at one time, and over years it has eroded away. So the first map I'm going to show you, and my husband actually highlighted it in yellow so that you could see it better. All the area in yellow is land that is no longer here, that has eroded. It is out to sea. Years ago, there used to be a road out there. Yeah, so it was a really pretty drive, but it kept getting eroded, and they tried a different road, and that got eroded. So the first picture I'm going to show you starts up at South Seas. So all this area, and it's going to end like down there by the at that end of Andy Rossi. So all this highlighted area, where the first road the road used to be in front of Gulfview Inn, is no longer here. Okay.
Is all the beach here natural?
They've had to, and let me just show you one more picture and I will address that question. That's a really good question. So where we currently are standing now is right here. This goes all the way down until you get to that big, past Tween Waters. So this is an indication of how much has eroded over the years from here down to a little past Tween Waters. All this is gone. And Captiva has done a wonderful job with their renourishment projects. And they have a committee up here, and they've been trying so many things. So the current sand is not the natural sand, similar to what they're doing on Sanibel. On Sanibel, they're trucking in, tons and tons of sand. So it's not the original sand.
So you're showing the erosion that's occurred, beach erosion.
Mm-hmm.
How much of it was storm related? Because Captiva used to be combined until one storm blew open. Now it's at Fish Pass. So, and then I don't know if on the north end of North Captiva, which goes over to Cayo Costa,
yes,
another storm, and where was the road based on the storm? So.
Okay, so let me go back to the South Seas map. So, how many of you are familiar with South Seas? Okay, South Seas used to have a building on there called King's Crown. Are you familiar with King's Crown? This is the location of King's Crown. King's Crown is no longer there, but this is where King's Crown was. So this erosion stops at that point. It didn't include the North Captiva, which was attached to Captiva. Okay, so the King's Crown is no longer there. It was there, but I'm thinking the last storm knocked it out. I'm really not sure, but that was probably
they're going to rebuild it, so it's going to be done.
So I just wanted to show you some illustrations about how much erosion has taken place over the years. And then I'm not going to go over all of these with you, but I did some research on the hurricanes. that have happened in Southwest Florida. And the earliest one that I documented was from 1873. And that was considered a massive hurricane. And the winds were 110 miles per hour. Now, you think about the last hurricane, Ian, and you think about the wind speed of that hurricane, which was, I believe, well over 150 miles an hour. I mean, it was
Right on the border of
Well, that's the storm, yeah. Cat 5, yeah.
So this was 110, but also what's important about the 1873 hurricane is they also had tremendous storm surge. So they had over 14 feet of storm surge at the 1873 hurricane. And now you look at Ian and the storm surge that was, created with Ian and caused a tremendous amount of damage to so many areas of Southwest Florida, especially Sanibel. But just to give you a number, I counted in 1930 to 2010. So 1930 to 2010, there were 74 hurricanes in Southwest Florida. The longest gap between hurricanes was about 15 years, from about 1970 till about 1984. They didn't have any documented hurricanes. And the first named hurricane that I have was in October 13th, 1950, and it was called King. King was the name of the hurricane. And prior to that, they didn't typically name the hurricanes. Okay, so I just want to recap a couple of things about the tour. The main focus of the tour was to focus on historical information of Captiva. So I thought there was no better place to start than with William Binder, which is in 1888 when he arrived here. Now, he wasn't the only homesteader, nor was he the most important homesteader. There were several other people that played a very valuable role in the development of Captiva. He just happened to be the one that I went down the rabbit hole with, and the one that I just kept researching and researching. And also there's a whole ton of history before 1888 of people that did the Spanish and other people that did come to the island that it's not included in our tour. So just to leave you with one thought, William Binder was here in 1888. Supposedly he was here for about 10 years all by himself. Left a wife who I believe he was divorced from, and left a child behind. The child was also in World War I and did send his father a letter at that point. And I do have a copy of that letter. And you could tell that there was a connection between the father and the son. I read Mr. Binder's obituary several times. The son wasn't available to attend the funeral. They had been disconnected for some reason. So Mr. Binder basically died alone, and he had sold off most of his property at the time of his death. He was great friends with Thomas Edison and the like, so you know that he was a very intelligent, well-spoken person. So I don't know what would have prompted him to live on this island in such isolation, other than it is a beautiful island. He wasn't a man of wealth as far as material things, but in my opinion, he was a man of wealth of knowledge. He was very educated. I don't know where that education came from. I don't know where his love of literature came from. I don't know any of that. I don't know how he got in the Grand Opry. I still ponder how he ended up here and why he ended up here. I did find an article because he was in the Army, and there seems to be something a little shady about that. So I don't know if it's he, but then I thought if he deserted the Army, he wouldn't have been able to homestead, I don't think. I don't know. And he was from the north, so when he left Austria, he lived in the north because he was able to homestead. If you fought for the Confederate side, you weren't able to homestead. So I don't know. Do you have any questions about the tour that I can answer? Any questions about history? Nope. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Mary Jane has a couple of announcements.
Well, no, before I have announcements, I wanted to thank you, Joe, for for doing this tour twice.
Oh.
And on behalf of the Historical Society, Jewel was a former board member, but then she moved away, and we really miss her. So
Oh,
thank you so much.
I miss you guys too.
Just a little thank you.
You guys did not have to do anything. I mean, I told you I should have paid you to let me do this. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate all that the society does for the history of Captiva. So keep up the good work. Go visit the history gallery if you haven't seen it. It's inside the library. It's incredible. It's beautiful. Okay, so I've been researching and researching, cannot find a picture of William Binder. And the closest I found was in this book, which is a sketch of the house, type of home that William Binder lived in, as well as a William Binder. And the reason why I don't think that's William Binder is because William Binder is missing an eye. This man has 2 eyes. And I think the author, couldn't find a picture of William Binder, so it included a sketch.